The Detroit Lions are in the middle of their offseason training. And with training camp fastly approaching, mini camp fastly approaching, there are going to be a lot of camp battles. There are going to be a lot of battles for positional playing time, battles for who gets the football, and battles to see which players can step up in the biggest moments for the franchise. Today, we're going to take a look at some of the most intriguing battles to watch throughout training camp, mini camp, and the rest of OTAs. Starting off with, in my opinion, one of the most intriguing in who is going to be wide receiver two. For a majority of the offseason, it has been placed that Jameson Williams will take over Josh Reynolds' role and he will be the second wide receiver in this offense. And with 70 targets now vacated from the absence of Josh Reynolds, there is certainly more targets to go around, but I don't think that Jameson Williams is necessarily a guarantee to be wide receiver two in this offense. Obviously, there are high expectations for him. Obviously, the ceiling and the big playability are there, but if Jameson Williams, for one reason or another, can't take that step forward, if he can't become the wide receiver two for the Detroit Lions, or isn't necessarily as impressive as the Lions want him to be, or as consistent as the Lions want him to be, there is a chance that Donovan Peoples-Jones ends up taking that wide receiver two spot. With Donovan Peoples-Jones just 2 years prior to this last season, coming off of a near 1,000-yard receiving season, I believe had 900 yards with the Cleveland Browns in 2022. There is some solid production there from DPJ, and there is some proven NFL production and proven NFL quality reps from Donovan Peoples-Jones that we haven't seen from Jameson Williams. There is contested catch ability. There is field stretching ability. There is bigger size, bigger physicality with Donovan Peoples-Jones. And even though I do think they will both see their targets, I think they will both get their receptions, and I do think they will both play an impact on this field, I do think there is a chance that Jameson Williams isn't the second wide receiver. There is a chance that Donovan Peoples-Jones is more impressive in the preseason. And even though that Jameson Williams is, by all accounts, having a great OTA, having a great offseason so far, and looking vastly improved from a season ago, I just don't think it is necessarily a lock that Jameson Williams is the wide receiver two. And I don't think it's smart to just write off Donovan Peoples-Jones as a player that at best is wide receiver three in this offense. Now, obviously, not every player or not every target is going to go to these two players or going to go to one player, right? Jameson Williams is likely not going to see 70 more targets than he did a season ago. They'll probably split it. I would say probably Jameson Williams, if I had to guess, gets about 40 to 50 of those targets, whereas Donovan Peoples-Jones gets somewhere between 20 to 30 of those targets. I do think Donovan Peoples-Jones and Jameson Williams will both have an impact on the offense, but I think it'll be a fun battle to see who Jared Goff develops chemistry with quicker and who can be a more reliable target for an offense and a football team that needs to win now. Now, another interesting battle this offseason is going to be who plays cornerback two, right? Carlton Davis is pretty solidly and pretty solidified as cornerback one, but there's a lot of competition for cornerback two. And by most people's accounts, it is going to be first-round pick Terrion Arnold, a big, fast, physical press man cornerback with great quickness, great ball skills, and a player that was already very impressive at rookie minicamp. But again, much like Jameson Williams, I wouldn't count out some of the other players. I wouldn't count out Ennis Rakestraw Jr. I wouldn't count out Emmanuel Mosley. I wouldn't even count out Amik Robertson, a player that was the cornerback two last year for the Las Vegas Raiders. And hey, really productive season for a player that is a little bit undersized. Now, I would guess if I had to put money on it that it will be Terrion Arnold, but I wouldn't be surprised if he split a little bit of time with Ennis Rakestraw. Ennis Rakestraw found a way to get on the football field because he is a second-round pick. He was the 61st overall selection, a great player at Missouri a season ago, and a player that I think the Lions will want to get on the field sooner rather than later. And we all know that Dan Campbell and the coaching staff doesn't give in to players just because of their draft status. Players don't just play because they were first round, second round, or third round picks. You have to earn your way on the field. And if Ennis Rakestraw is a more impressive player in the preseason, Ennis Rakestraw will play. If Emmanuel Mosley comes back a little bit early from injury and is more impressive in training camp, he is going to play cornerback too. And although I think Arnold will be that guy as soon as the preseason starts, and I think throughout the preseason and going into the regular season. That is the plan. I don't think it is concrete. I don't think it is solidified with all of the competition still left to be played out. Now, in a very similar vein, I think safety 3 is very much up for grabs in this offense. Kirby Joseph and Ifeatu Melifonwu are going to be the starting safeties going into the preseason, but is Brian Branch the third safety? Does Brian Branch kind of make that transition and play more of a safety 3 role on top of being a slot cornerback on 2 safety sets? Or do they keep Brian Branch in the slot like they did last year? And do they rely on a guy like CJ Moore? Does Brandon Joseph take a nice step forward and he become a third safety in this offense? Or do the Lions go out closer to training camp, closer to mandatory mini camp? And do they sign a Quandre Diggs? Do they somehow steal a guy like Justin Simmons away from free agency? How is this going to play out where the Lions are going to have a third safety? Because last year in the playoffs, the Lions played with 4 safeties on the field. They played with Joseph and Melifonwu as the deep safeties, with CJ Gardner-Johnson as a third safety, and Brian Branch on the field at the same time. So if they want to open up the playbook to have those possibilities again, that means they're going to have to rely on one of CJ Moore or Brandon Joseph to be that third safety. And I think it's going to be a really interesting battle as to how they adjust and how they kind of fix that hole left by CJ Gardner-Johnson. Does Brian Branch go to that third safety and you put Ennis Rakestraw in the slot? Do you put Brian Branch at safety and put another player at the slot? Does one of the undrafted rookie free agents like Maurice Norris potentially make an impact and play as that third safety? I do think that battle will be really interesting and very fun to see, and I'm very excited to see how it plays out throughout the preseason as well as the rest of the offseason training. Now, this isn't really a camp battle between one player and another player, but I am really, really interested to see what Sione Vaki is able to do for the Detroit Lions, because as of rookie minicamp and as of OTAs, he seems to have a pretty universal role within the Detroit Lions offense as a gunner on special teams, a returner on kickoffs, a running back, a receiver, a safety. He is kind of the jack of all trades player, and I do think it'll be really interesting to see what role Sione Vaki can carve out for the Detroit Lions. Is he going to return kickoffs? Is he going to be a gunner on kickoffs? Is he going to be a punt returner, a kick returner, a coverage guy, a running back, a receiver, a safety? This is a player that can play 4, 5, 6 different roles on a defense or an offense or a special teams and be impactful at each and every one of them. So it'll be really interesting. And especially with Jahmyr Gibbs missing a little bit of time early in camp and early in OTAs, there is going to be a chance for Sione Vaki to get some first team reps, for Sione Vaki to take some handoffs behind the starting offensive line. And I do think we will see a lot of Sione Vaki in the preseason and throughout training camp. I think it'll be really, really fun to see what kind of role you can carve out with him and what kind of player Sione Vaki can become. Now, the last couple of positions we're going to take a look at is offensive line. Obviously, the starting offensive line is very solidified. And last year, I believe the Lions kept 4 players on the interior of the backups, right? I think they kept 3 or 4 backup offensive linemen on top of the 5 starters. So with all of the talent that the Lions have at backup, what players are going to make the roster? You would assume that Giovanni Manu would make the roster as a 4th round pick. You would assume that Christian Mahogany makes it as a 6th round pick and a player that was projected to go much higher. You would expect Colby Sorsdale to make it because he was a 5th round pick a season ago and started a couple of games and looked really good. You would assume Coyote Awaska makes the roster after he started the NFC Championship game, as well as a number of other games for the Lions last year. You would expect veteran tackle Dan Skipper to make the roster, right, as a player that was really good for the Lions a season ago. And I would even expect guys like Kingsley Ebukam, the center out of Florida, to make the roster as a backup center, looking really good in OTA so far. And then you have Connor Galvin, a player that was really impressive in the preseason a year ago and gave the Lions some good protection on the exterior last season in the preseason. So of these 7 players that I just listed, 5 of which I would almost consider guarantees to make the roster, 4 of them are probably going to get cut. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the offensive line looks in the preseason, where they play Manu, where they play Mahogany, where they play Owaska, where they play Sorsdale, how Ebukam looks, how Skipper looks. It'll be really, really interesting because, as I said, I think at max you keep 4 backup offensive linemen, but between the 5 of Dan Skipper, Colby Sorsdale, Coyote Owaska, Christian Mahogany, and Giovanni Manu, one of those players is going to get cut. And I honestly don't know which one it is going to be. Now, I think a very similar thing is going to happen for the defensive line. Obviously, you have Aiden Hutchinson, Aleem McNeil, DJ Reader, and Marcus Davenport as your starters. But then you get into some of the backups and you get into some of the depth players on this roster, and they might be nearly as deep as the offensive line, right? You have obviously Josh Paschal going into his 3rd season that you expect a pretty big jump out of. When Josh Paschal's been healthy, he's been really impactful on the defensive line, doing a lot of the dirty work, a lot of the cleanup work from the backside, but he's been really, really impressive. You have Broderick Martin, who has taken a big step forward in year 2, looks bigger, looks more physical, looks a lot stronger, looks very much more in NFL shape as opposed to last offseason when he showed up to rookie minicamp. Levi Onwuzurike was a really good pass rusher for the Lions late in the season last year. He was one of their better graded interior pass rushers in the absence of Aleem McNeil, and he was a really good player from that standpoint. You have Betts from the CFL, who last year in Canada put up 18 sacks as the defensive player of the year in the CFL. Is he going to put up some good numbers? Is he going to look like a good edge rusher? James Houston, coming off of a major ankle injury from a season ago, looked really good in the NFC Championship game. What is his role going to be in the pass rush? Makai Wingo, the 6th round selection pass rusher from the interior, has been impressive early in camp as well. What is his role going to be? And then another rookie who's been really impressive, Nate Lynn from William and Mary, by all accounts, is having really good OTA so far, showing off great bend and an ability to get to the passer. So again, much like the offensive line, I don't know if every single one of these players makes the roster. And if they do, they're all going to be fighting for playing time. Paschal will likely make the roster. Martin will almost definitely make the roster. I think Onwuzurike is a good chance to make the roster. I think Betts has a good chance of making the roster. Houston will be back. I think Wingo will be back. And even though Nate Lynn may not make the roster, I would be surprised if he wasn't on at least the practice squad this year. So I think playing time and I think competition for starting reps is going to be really, really interesting to see how the defensive line looks in the preseason and what players rotate in with those starting 4 that we mentioned prior. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Those are my biggest camp battles. There's a lot of competition on this roster, a lot of open playing time available. Despite the Lions being one of the most complete rosters in the NFL, there is playing time up for grabs, and there are starting spots available for players. And I think it'll be a fun opportunity to see which players step up to the plate, which players are able to take advantage of their opportunity, and which players end up being impactful in 2024. With all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know what camp battle you are most excited to look forward to and what camp battle you want to see the most going into OTAs, mini camp, and training camp. Be very curious what you guys have to say and your guys' opinions on it. With all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go.